There you are. Well, there you are, boy, Uncle Vernon said, a nasty grin on his face. Platform 9, Platform 10. Your platform should be somewhere in the middle, but they don't seem to have built it yet, do they? Harry rolled his eyes. You're some kind of moron, you know that. And no, I wouldn't recommend trying anything in front of all these witnesses, Harry said casually as he watched his uncle's face begin to purple. He figured he was reasonably safe saying anything he wanted to him, seeing as how he wouldn't see him for 9 whole months. Of course they don't have the platform be obvious, it's a train for wizard children with wizard items that would attract far too much attention. Then where is it, boy? Vernon spat. You just walk right through the portal. I know it looks like a brick wall, but I assure you it's not. How is that possible, you ask? Magic. In fact, you can come with me, if you like, and see it for yourself, Harry suggested. Uncle Vernon looked like he was about to lunge at Harry, but Harry just nodded towards the local constable who was standing not 20 feet away, and Uncle Vernon reluctantly backed down. You'll pay for that, boy, he whispered menacingly and then walked back to his car. As they drove away, Harry saw Dudley and Aunt Petunia laughing. Clearly his uncle had lied about the encounter. Now, Harry was fully aware of the fact that antagonizing his uncle was probably not the best plan, but he had stood up to people 100 times more intimidating than the likes of Vernon Dursley, and so he wasn't about to just cower as he would have when he was really 11. Harry could basically write off any chance of improving relations with his uncle, but the rest of his family were a different story. He knew that his Aunt Petunia had once loved her sister and was more scared of what Harry's presence would mean in terms of her family's safety and jealous that Lily had always been the favorite. More than 15 years of resentment would be hard to overcome, but Harry had always hated summer and the fact that he never had anything to do, so he may as well try that. Dudley was another avenue that Harry could pursue. Granted at this point in time he was little more than a spoiled bully, but he did eventually come to accept Harry after the Dementor incident. He wasn't quite sure how he could speed up a reconciliation with Dudley, but it might be worth looking into. It would definitely make life at Privet Drive more peaceful, that was for sure. Packed with muggles, of course. Harry looked up abruptly as he heard Mrs. Weasley's voice. He quickly hurried after them. Now, what's the platform number? Molly asked. Harry wondered briefly how in the world she managed to forget the platform number since she'd been doing this for God knows how many years. 9 3/4. Ginny piped up. Mum, can't I go? Harry couldn't help but grin. While they were both currently way too young for him to be having any romantic thoughts about her, she was still a cute kid. When all the Hogwarts-bound Weasleys save Ron had gone through, Harry approached them. Excuse me, Harry said. Hello, dear. First time at Hogwarts? Ron's new, too, Molly said kindly. Yes, Harry nodded before turning to Ron. Hi, my name's Harry Potter. As he anticipated, the reaction was immediate. Ron's eyes immediately flew to his forehead and Ginny started squealing. Well, at least this way she wouldn't complain about not seeing him, though watching the love of his life act like a fangirl was somewhat irritating. Are you really? Ron asked. Are you really Ron? Harry asked. Of course I am, Ron said, looking confused. Why wouldn't I be? I could say the same to you, Harry replied. But I can't believe that you'd be Harry Potter. Harry shrugged. Well, I suppose someone has to be, right, he said, casually brushing his hair out of his eyes and revealing the most famous scar in the history of magic. So anyway, I was wondering if you could help me find the platform, he asked, turning back to Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley, whose eyes had filled with tears upon finding out who Harry was, probably because such a polite boy had had such a tragic life and at such a young age, too, nodded. Of course, dear. All you have to do is walk straight at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Don't stop and don't be scared you'll crash into it, that's very important. Best do it at a bit of a run if you're nervous. Go on, go now before Ron. Harry thanked her for her help and walked through the platform. Harry looked around, smiling a little at the sight of everyone so much younger than the last time he saw them. Suddenly, one of the Weasley twins approached him. Want a hand? He asked. Unfortunately, Harry had no idea which one it was, as he had never been able to tell them apart to begin with, and George had lost his ear the summer after his 6th year and then Fred had died, so he never really got an opportunity, even after he had married into the family. Thanks, Harry replied. Oi, Fred. See me and help. Okay, now Harry was reasonably sure that Fred was the one who had approached him. After all, the twins never actually referred to themselves by their proper names, as apparently that was for lesser pranksters. Once the twins helped him, he again brushed his hair out of his eyes, this time more because the effort of lifting his school trunks, he should probably put a charm on it to lighten it, than because he had any great need to reveal himself to people who would hear him announce to everybody at his sorting soon enough. It was strange, though, to see George with 2 ears again. To see Fred alive again. His heart constricted briefly and he tried to imagine how it'd be to see some of the other people he'd lost. Especially Sirius, who was still in Azkaban. What's that? George asked. Now that Harry had a good idea as to which one had first approached him, he knew that he'd be able to tell them apart at least until they left his line of sight. Apparently Bill was the only one who had been consistently able to tell them apart, hence he was their favorite sibling. Well, Bill and Percy, but the latter was far too uptight to ever be idolized by the Weasley twins. Blimey, said Fred. Are you Dash? He is, George confirmed. Harry couldn't help but notice how surreal it was that the Weasley twins were, for once, not finishing each other's sentences. HM. No matter how well they knew each other, that must be pretty difficult. Were they legilimens? Aren't you? Well, I'm seriously confused, if that's what you mean, Harry told them. Harry Potter, chorused the twins. Nope, Harry said cheerfully. You're not? Fred asked, bemused. No, I'm not. Have you ever met him? Harry asked. Well, no, but George began. Then what makes you think I'm him? Harry demanded. Well, you've got a scar, Fred offered. So does Dumbledore. Are you going to go accusing him of being Potter next? Of course not. George said, looking thoughtful. Filch, on the other hand. So who are you then, if you're not Harry Potter? Fred asked skeptically. And why do you have a lightning bolt scar on your forehead? Well, after that nasty little incident with the Dark Lord, my mother decided that lightning bolt scars were in and shot a cutting curse at me. Harry paused. At least, that's the official story. I think that was before my father had the courage to be cut off for 3 months by telling her that maybe she should leave the cooking to the house elves. Fred and George just stared at him. Hey, don't judge. And I'm Draco Malfoy, by the way. He peered at them suspiciously. You AIE purebloods, right? Wordlessly, Fred nodded. George found his voice first. You're Draco Malfoy. You have a problem with that? Harry crossed his arms. No, but, aren't your parents blonde? He asked. Your point being? How can 2 blonde people have a black-haired son? George asked reasonably. No, my mother was not having a very public affair with Severus Snape. How dare you even suggest that? Harry screeched. Fred held up his hands. Calm down, he didn't mean to offend you. Well, he did, Harry sniffed. In fact, I'm going to write to Father right now. Isn't he still at the platform? George asked, perplexed. Yes, he is, but actually talking to your relatives is for half-bloods, and with that Harry stormed off, wondering how on earth he had managed to keep a straight face through that entire exchange. One thing he knew, though, was that he definitely would have the twins' respect after they realized he tricked them. Hey, Mum, guess what? Guess who we just met on the train, Harry heard Fred say. Who? Molly asked. Draco Malfoy. That's nothing, I met Harry Potter, Ginny told him, still sounding awestruck. Why do you want to meet a GIT like him anyway? Ron asked. Meeting him wasn't the interesting part, George explained. Then what was? Ron asked. Apparently his mum and Snape were having an affair and he's the byproduct. Fred exclaimed. What? Molly asked. This is much better gossip than last year's Albus Dumbledore was madly in love with Gellert Grindelwald. Honestly, you'd think Rita Skeeter would learn to stop making up such sensational stories. Obviously Dumbledore was struck speechless by the blatant lies and thus couldn't be bothered to deny it. It's true, he practically admitted it, George confirmed. I've got to go find Andromeda, Mrs. Weasley muttered. Be good kids. And with that she hurried away, Ginny trailing along behind her and casting longing looks back at the express. Anyone sitting here? Ron asked, entering Harry's compartment hesitantly. Nope, go ahead, Harry invited. Hey, Ron, George said, entering their compartment. Listen, we're going down the why are you sitting with Malfoy? Malfoy? Ron looked confused. You mean him, he gestured to Harry. Fred nodded. But that's not Malfoy, that's Harry Potter, Ron explained. What? Fred asked. But you told us you were Draco Malfoy. Harry shrugged. What can I say? Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy, sometimes I get confused. George, I think we've been pranked, George said. Our first year's allowed to do that? Fred wondered. Does that mean that what you said about Snape's not true either? It might be, Harry said neutrally. Feel free to spread the rumor in any event. Both twins' eyes lit up at this and they ran off down the hall. Harry felt slightly guilty for doing this when he was planning on making a sincere effort to not make Draco Malfoy his arch-nemesis, because honestly, if he really wanted one that badly, there was always Voldemort, but then decided that since Draco had spread that same rumor about his mother and Snape, turnabout was fair play. You're my hero, Ron blurted out. Because of my facial disfigurement? Harry asked. No, because you pranked Fred and George, Ron explained. At Harry's incredulous look, he hastened to add, but your scar's pretty cool, too. Yeah, it was really considerate of Voldemort to give me such a wicked-looking scar when he attempted to brutally murder me as an infant, Harry said dryly. Ron just stared at him, fascinated and a little horrified. You really shouldn't say his name, you know. You know, the more people tell me that, the less likely I am to actually listen to them, Harry remarked casually. Ron looked torn between the desire to impress upon Harry the importance of not saying Tom Riddle's silly little pseudonym and asking more about the night the two had met for the first time. Do you remember it? You do realize I was 15 months old at the time, right? Harry asked, raising an eyebrow. I know. Ron defended, although his tone of voice indicated that he didn't seem to really grasp that Harry was far too young to have even properly remembered the event, much less actually play some secret part in Voldemort's downfall. I just thought that you might remember because of the scar. Now it was Harry's turn to stare. You know, I'm starting to think that you people don't actually know anything about the way that scars work, he said, remembering how everyone had thought that his scar made him a lying schizophrenic fifth year. What do you mean you people? Ron asked. You know, wizards, Harry explained. But you're a wizard, Ron pointed out. Yes, but I was raised by muggles, Harry explained. What does that matter? Ron asked. Harry smiled at Ron's inability to comprehend why it would matter. He was so innocent back then. Muggles don't have magic and as such are forced to be much more sensible. Oh. Ron paused and looked expectantly at Harry. Harry sighed. And to answer your question, yes, a little. What do you remember? Ron asked eagerly. That was the annoying part about Ron being so innocent, he tended to have the tact of a troll. He'd gotten much better at not asking such painful questions such as what he remembered about the first time someone attempted to kill him after he'd started dating Hermione. Well, Harry said, trying to piece together all the flashes he'd seen over the years. I remember someone who I assume is my father telling my mother to take me and go. Then there's laughing, someone who I assume is my mother begging Voldemort to spare my life. He tells her to stand aside and let him kill me. She says no and asks him to kill her instead. He does. Then there's a lot of green light and my forehead felt like it was on fire, Harry explained. Now Ron looked horrified. I'm sorry, mate, I didn't think dash. It's okay, Harry cut him off. He really should have thought, but then again, he was only 11 and, knowing Molly Weasley, living the most sheltered life imaginable. Are all your family wizards? Harry asked, quickly changing the subject. Yes, I think so, said Ron. I think Mum's got a second cousin who's an accountant, but we never talk about him. Harry froze. He couldn't believe he'd never realized that the first time around, but to be fair, he was only a child at the time. Why not? Ron looked confused. What do you mean? Your accountant cousin, is he magical? No, Ron replied, still not getting it. Is that why you don't talk about him? Harry asked. Clearly Ron had never thought about why they pretended they didn't have a squib relative. Just like how the Dursleys liked to pretend that they didn't have a wizard nephew. If the Weasleys of all people could succumb to pure-blood prejudices like that, no wonder Voldemort's only real opposition came from vigilante groups who functioned more like Albus Dumbledore's personal cult in his quest to atone for helping Grindelwald all those years ago. Still, the fact that Ron had never realized that his lack of magic was the reason they ignored their cousin was to his credit, and so Harry supposed he couldn't really take his frustration with the sorry state of the wizarding world where everyone was prejudiced against everyone out on him. Not to mention that it would completely destroy any chance they'd have of being friends. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one, Hermione said, entering the compartment, Neville trailing behind her. No, but you could always summon it, Harry suggested. I don't know the spell for that, Hermione admitted, sounding embarrassed that she didn't know how to do a spell that they didn't teach for several more years. Here, I'll do it, Harry volunteered and took out his wand. Accio Neville's toad. Nothing happened for a moment and Hermione looked doubtfully at him. Are you sure that's a real spell? Harry nodded. Oh, he was sure all right. Well, it's not very good, is Dash, but she was interrupted as Trevor flew through the door. Oh. Ron looked over at Harry, surprised. If you knew how to summon his toad, why didn't you do it the first time he was here? Because he'd wanted to see Hermione again and hopefully make a better first impression. I guess I didn't think of it, Harry lied. I've tried a few simple spells, too, just for practice, and it's all worked for me. Nobody in my family's magic at all, it was ever such a surprise, but I was so pleased, of course, I mean, it's the best school of witchcraft there is. Then isn't it convenient that it just happens to be the one geographically closest to where we live? Harry muttered. Hermione gave him a look. I've learnt all our set books by heart, of course, I just hope it will be enough. I'm Hermione Granger by the way, who are you? I'm Ron Weasley, Ron finally managed to say after staring blankly at her for 3 whole minutes. Harry Potter, Harry told her. Are you really? Hermione asked, curiously. What is it with people not having faith that I know my own name? Harry asked Neville, who just shrugged. And Hermione, I didn't know that I was a wizard until I got my letter, because my relatives refuse to acknowledge that magic exists, and Ron was telling me that there are plenty of Muggleborns around, so I'm sure you'll be fine. Besides, I doubt that anyone else actually bothered to memorize all of the textbooks, so I think that not only is it enough, you're way ahead of everyone else. Really? Hermione perked up. Really, Harry confirmed. Although, I did memorize our potions textbook, he admitted. Ron looked horrified at the thought of his potential best friend being a bookworm and scooted closer to Neville. But that's just because I heard that our teacher hated my dad and I don't want to give him a reason to hate me, Harry quickly added. Not, of course, like Snape would need a reason, but at least he wouldn't embarrass him now with his first day surprise questions. Harry probably could have just looked up those specific questions, but then Snape might get mad and ask him some more. Not to mention that it had been years since his first class with Snape and he honestly didn't even remember what the questions were or how many of them there were. Oh, that's okay then, Ron said, relaxing. You're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts, you know, Hermione told him. Well, I wouldn't believe everything you read, Harry told her, a bit uncomfortable. Why not? Hermione asked. Because by this time tomorrow, the Daily Prophet and Witch Weekly will have probably run a story on how Draco Malfoy is Narcissa Malfoy and Severus Snape's love child, Harry told her. I'm afraid I don't understand, Hermione frowned. Who are Dash? Don't worry about it, Harry told her. You'll find out soon enough. I guess I should be going, now that you found Trevor, Hermione said, getting up, Neville reluctantly following suit. Ron, being 11, didn't notice that they obviously wanted to stay, but Harry did and his heart went out to his past and future friends. Hey, why don't you guys stay a while? We've got way too much food, we need some help eating it. Hermione beamed and sat right back down again. Thanks, Harry, Neville said quietly. A short while later, Draco Malfoy entered the compartment. Neville Longbottom, he proclaimed proudly. Yes? Neville asked, surprised. Not you, Draco told him. Him, he said, pointing at Harry. Sorry, Harry told him. But that's Neville. Oh. Was I close? He asked hopefully. How could you be close? I'm either a Longbottom or I'm not. Which, for the record, I'm not. Well, you could be related to him, Draco pointed out. Harry snorted. I probably am, due to all the inbreeding. Draco chose to ignore that, partly because he wanted to find out who Harry was, as he had most likely spent the past month obsessing about it, and partly because it was true. Then who are you? That's Harry Potter, Hermione said helpfully. Draco laughed. No, really, who is he? Harry simply lifted his bangs up. Wow, you are Harry Potter, Draco said, sounding a little astonished. Yep, Harry said, vaguely recalling something from his first time around. Weren't people talking about that? Well, yes, Draco admitted. But they were also spewing the most ridiculous story about my being Professor Snape's love child. Really? Harry asked innocently. Wow, I guess people will believe anything. But Harry, Hermione looked puzzled. Didn't you already dash? No, that people will believe anything. Neville, surprisingly, cut her off, having figured out that Harry had started the rumor. Yeah, he did, but he's been a celebrity for years, so I suppose he would have. You're Draco Malfoy then. Ron sniggered, his 11-year-old maturity level finding the new rumor about him hilarious. Fortunately, Draco misinterpreted Ron's amusement. Think my name's funny, do you? Or perhaps not so fortunately. No need to ask who you are. My father told me all the Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford. Wow, that's oddly specific, Harry remarked. I take it that your fathers know each other. And are probably not on the best terms. Draco nodded. You'd be right, Potter. You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are much better than others. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. Harry groaned inwardly. It was like Malfoy was trying to become his enemy or something. Not, of course, that Harry could possibly consider an 11-year-old boy his enemy, but he knew that his school years would go a lot smoother with one less person out to destroy him. How to best handle this? He couldn't shake Malfoy's hand, of course, but that would give him the wrong idea and alienate everyone else in the compartment. But how could he not shake it and still get out of a pointless 7-year rivalry? Finally, he said, I'm sure you could, Draco, but the thing is, I'm still new to this whole magic is real thing and so I'm not sure if I could really make an informed choice at the moment. You wouldn't want me to pick Ron just because we bonded over candy and you thought I was Neville, do you? Draco considered. I guess not. And besides, I'd really like to at least make it to school before alienating anyone, Harry said diplomatically. So maybe at some point I'll decide that you're right, Ron is the root of all evil, and take you up on your offer of help. Maybe not. But in the meantime, I still need to figure out which of you is right. Bull, he knew exactly who was right and who he would ultimately choose if either Malfoy or Ron forced his hand. But it was a pretty reasonable thing for someone who barely knew either of them to say. All right, Draco agreed reluctantly. But you'll soon see that I'm right. And with that he left, the bridge unburnt. Chapter 3. So where do you think you're going to be? Ron asked. I think I have a pretty good idea, Harry responded. I'm going to be a Gryffindor, Ron announced proudly. How do you know that? Harry asked. I mean, unless you're a lazy, traitorous, idiot, you could end up in any of the other 3 houses. All my family has been in Gryffindor, Ron explained. So? Do Gryffindor parents necessarily have to raise Gryffindor children? Harry asked, panicking slightly at the thought that Gryffindors being such horrible parents that their children would have to be brave to survive it. All my family's been in Hufflepuff, Ernie Macmillan volunteered. And you already know that my family's all been in Slytherin, Draco reminded him. So all 3 of you want to be in one particular house simply because everyone else has been there? Harry asked. Yep, Ron nodded. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that sounds a lot like Hufflepuff loyalty, wanting to be in the same house as everyone else in your family, Harry said casually. Ron and Draco looked distraught while Ernie beamed. Although, Harry continued thoughtfully. Wanting to be in a house that everyone trusts implicitly and always underestimates is brilliant, possibly Ravenclaw of you. Or else a great way to help your Slytherin ambitions along. Ernie growled at Harry, but was saved having to answer by his name being called. Fortunately, Malfoy didn't have much time to advance on Harry menacingly before his name was called. You didn't really mean all that, did you, Harry? Ron asked, his face white. I really want to be in Gryffindor. I'm sure you'll get in there, Harry assured him, feeling a little bit guilty for messing with them. Not very, because Draco usually had anything Harry felt the need to do to him coming, well, except that whole attempted murder thing 6th year, but to be fair Draco tried to Crucio him first, and in a little over a year Ernie would most likely be convinced that he was evil. Ron, however, still had a huge inferiority complex that Harry wanted to help with, not make worse. He didn't have much more time to ponder this, however, as his name was up soon. Potter, Harry, Professor McGonagall read off. Instantly, the whispers broke out. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? Now, Harry had had his fair share of notoriety in his first life and had had years to get used to the fame. Still, nothing quite compared to the first time a large group of people, particularly teenagers, had seen him. Yes, that's right, Harry said, stepping forward. The gossiping quickly died down and the teachers looked at each other in slight surprise. Clearly everyone had expected him to just passively encourage the rumors. As if, I am Harry Potter. If anyone asks me if I'm sure that I am, thus implying that I don't have the capabilities of any self-respecting 1-year-old, I will hex them. You have been warned. Now, Harry wasn't sure that he'd actually hex them, at least if they were a 3rd year or younger, but it seemed like a good way to stop all of the non-stop questioning of his identity. And the horrified look on Snape's face was a nice touch. Although now he probably just inadvertently confirmed that he was, in fact, James Potter reincarnate. Well, such is the life. Harry then walked over to the hat and placed it on his head. The hat said. Difficult. Very difficult. How is it difficult? You've already sorted me once. Yes, but now you've gone back in time to manipulate events in your favor, which is a very Slytherin thing to do. Good point. Except, for the whole it was a complete and total accident part. Well, you're incredibly intelligent for someone of your age, maybe you should be a Ravenclaw, the hat suggested next. Harry rolled his eyes. Actually, I'm rather average for someone of my age, so no I shouldn't. Although I'll be damned if I let Hermione beat me as far as grades go. I don't care if she is a genius, I'm still 12 years older than her. The hat sighed. Fine, no Ravenclaw either. But since your loyalty, particularly to the Weasley family who you seem to support no matter what they do, is astounding, what about Hufflepuff? Harry shrugged. Go ahead, I'll just transfer to Gryffindor. Can you do that? The hat asked. Another shrug. I'm the boy who lived pre-dark wizard rumors. I can decide who lives and who dies. Rather full of yourself, aren't you? The hat asked, annoyed at Harry's rejection of all other houses. A little, yeah, Harry admitted. But hey, isn't that a Gryffindor trait? And why are you trying so hard to put me in a different house? Well, what am I supposed to do? Just put you in Gryffindor because you want me to and because I did it once already. That's not how these things work, the hat explained. That's how it worked last time, Harry disagreed. Well, as I have no memory of the incident, I'm forced to speculate. You, as a terrified 11-year-old, had the nerve to argue with the being that decided the course of your life. Sounds like Gryffindor to me. What do you mean course of your life? I thought it only affected Hogwarts. The hat chuckled, actually chuckled. Oh please, do you really believe that? Name one Slytherin nobody thought was either evil or a coward. Or, occasionally, an evil coward. Harry didn't have an answer for that. Or take Ravenclaws. They're supposed to be incredibly inept and spend their whole lives studying, even when you're hit in the face of examples of this not being true, such as, from what I can tell of your experiences, Cho Chang and Luna Lovegood. Or Hufflepuff, they're supposed to be the house you go in when you don't have what it takes to be in any of the other houses, but Cedric Diggory was apparently the most qualified person in his year. What do they say about Gryffindor? Harry asked, highly amused. Cannon fodder. Harry snorted. Typical. I guess I kinda see your point, though. I mean, Hagrid basically told me that all dark wizards are Slytherins, even though he knew at least one Golden Boy Gryffindor became one, even if he does think it's serious not Pettigrew. And you hear a lot about how so-and-so's family was all Slytherin so of course they're all Death Eaters or, at the very least, pureblood fanatics. And the Weasleys put so much stock in the fact that they're all Gryffindors that it's ridiculous. So you'll go in another house then, the hat asked hopefully. Sorry, Harry apologized. I really would, but I'd like to be with my friends again. Not to mention that Ron's too immature right now to consider being friends with a Slytherin. Fine, the hat grumbled. I suppose waltzing through the veil of death counts as being incredibly reckless anyway, might as well put you with the other people who don't seem to be capable of thinking things through in Gryffindor. Predictably, his house gave him the loudest cheer yet, not suspecting that they'd just been insulted. Ron was quickly sorted afterwards. Well done, Ron, excellent, Percy said pompously. What do you mean excellent? Harry asked, feigning confusion. He got a Hogwarts letter, of course they were going to sort him. I meant, good job getting into Gryffindor, Percy explained patronizingly. You mean that you would have been upset if he got into any of the other 3 equally noble houses? I would have thought you'd just be happy that he's going to be a wizard at all. Well, I am, of course I am, Percy quickly backtracked. It's just that it's better that he's in Gryffindor than in any of the other 3. I thought prefects were supposed to help promote inter-house unity, Harry scratched his head. Maybe I should ask Dumbledore how he plans to achieve that when his representatives among the student body insist on perpetuating house prejudices. Percy paled as the thought of what such a complaint would do to his chances to be head boy. Harry turned his attention to his fellow first years just in time to hear Seamus ask, how did he get covered in blood? I've never asked, came the ghost's delicate reply. Unless Harry was very much mistaken, the he they were referring to was the Bloody Baron. Now, he probably shouldn't divulge this, seeing as how it was obviously something they wanted to keep private, but then again, he'd never really liked the Bloody Baron or the Grey Lady. I can tell you, Harry spoke up. Everyone turned to him. And how would you, a first year, know a thing like that? Sir Nicholas demanded. Harry shrugged. Magic. No one could find a flaw with that answer, although if Harry wasn't careful, he'd have everyone clamoring after him to retake divination as he was obviously a seer. So what happened? Asked Seamus. The Grey Lady, who, by the way, is the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower, is actually Helena Ravenclaw, the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw. I'm guessing being the daughter of the most brilliant witch of the time couldn't have been easy and she developed an inferiority complex. Her mother had a diadem that was said to make the wearer wiser. Helena decided it was a good idea to steal the diadem and run off to points unknown with it. Her mother sent a former suitor of hers, the Bloody Baron, to go and retrieve her. Helena wanted to go back, was too proud and so refused. The Baron lost his temper, killed her, realized what he did, went all emo, and then killed himself, Harry said, helping himself to some treacle tart. That sounds like a bad soap opera, Hermione said, sounding affronted. Are you sure? Hermione, didn't we already go over the whole asking Harry if his sure thing when it came to my name? Well, yes, but you're more likely to know your name than something that happened over a millennium ago. Hermione asked reasonably. Yeah, how would you know? Dean Thomas asked him. Harry shrugged. She told me. Who, the Grey Lady? Nearly headless Nick looked bewildered. At Harry's nod, he continued, when? 7th year, Harry replied, making use of the amazing phenomena that was telling the truth but having that truth be so incredible that everyone assumed you were joking. Well, if you were lucky. If not, they tended to think you were a lying schizophrenic. Well, if you didn't want to tell us, you could have just said so, Seamus told him. Eventually, the subject turned to families. I'm half and half, said Seamus. Me dad's a muggle. Mam didn't tell him she was a witch till after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him. The others laughed, but Harry frowned. It had seemed so amusing the first time around, but with what he'd heard of Snape's upbringing because Eileen Prince had done exactly the same thing. You're lucky, Harry found himself saying. Everyone looked over at him, confused. You're lucky your dad took it so well. He could have easily panicked and left. Or stayed and resented your mother for lying to him and you for trapping him there. You're lucky that your father's a good man. There was an awkward silence for a moment, as no one quite knew what to say to that. Finally, Ron asked, what about you, Neville? Well, my gran brought me up and she's a witch, said Neville, but the family thought I was a muggle for ages. Don't you mean a squib? Harry asked. Neville nodded. My great-uncle Algy kept trying to catch me off my guard and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off the end of Blackpool Pier once. I nearly drowned, but nothing happened until I was 8. Great-uncle Algy came round for tea and was hanging me out of an upstairs window by the ankles when my great-auntie Enid offered him a meringue and he accidentally let go. But I bounced, all the way down the garden and into the road. They were all really pleased. Gran was crying, she was so happy. Dear God, what a difference a mere dozen years makes in a person's perspective. So, let me get this straight, Harry said, trying to stay calm. You're basically saying that your family kept attempting to kill you in order to try and force you to do some magic. So, if you hadn't been a wizard they would have rather that you died. And your grandmother was so happy that you were magic she completely overlooked the fact that if you hadn't managed to use magic, you would have died? Well, they wanted to know if I was going to be able to attend Hogwarts, Neville said timidly. Harry knew that this probably wasn't something that Neville needed to hear, but it was something that he needed to say. He remembered all too well the damage Neville's loving family had done to him, damage it took him years to get over. Harry also remembered Neville destroying the last bit of Voldemort's immortality and enabling Harry to win and felt an intense wave of anger at the thought of what Neville's childhood must have been like. Because honestly, the Dursleys may have hated him with a passion and made that abundantly clear, but at least they never tried to kill him. If they wanted to know so badly, they should have checked the Hogwarts register. Granted that was probably highly unusual and possibly against regulation, but Dumbledore would have made an exception if he knew that your relatives would attempt to kill you, Harry said coldly. And all that pressure was probably detrimental to any chance of you performing accidental magic. Basically, what I'm saying is that they really shouldn't have done that, you, Neville. Neville said nothing, but eyed him with an oddly speculative look on his face. Harry's classes progressed much as they did the last time, he supposed, except he knew how to perform all the simple first-year spells, and thus his teachers were torn between thinking he was a prodigy and thinking he was somehow cheating. Defense against the dark arts was a little different, though. Harry decided that while he wouldn't do anything that would make it blatantly obvious that he knew that Quirrell and Voldemort on the back of his head, that didn't mean he had to ignore what he had noticed the first time around, even if he had misinterpreted it. The minute Quirrell's back was turned to write on the chalkboard, Harry felt the familiar pain in his scar, or semi-familiar. He hadn't felt it in 6 years, after all, and he put his hand on his forehead and yelped. Everything all alright, Mr. P. Potter? Quirrell asked. Your turban makes my scar hurt, Harry said bluntly. What? Quirrell asked, looked panicked. The rest of the class just laughed, clearly not believing him. But, he supposed that was better than them deciding he was crazy. In fact, maybe if he set it up like this now, there wouldn't be that Rita Skeeter fiasco when she found out about his dreams. You heard me, Harry told him. So I would appreciate it if you could not have your turban completely facing me, as I think that would be more conducive to my learning environment. How does your scar hurt, Harry? Hermione asked skeptically. Wouldn't that be your forehead? Harry shrugged. I don't know what to tell you, Hermione. All I know is that my scar hurts, not my forehead. How? Hermione repeated. Harry wasn't quite sure how to explain it and so left it at that. Finally came the day he was most looking forward to, first-year potions as a semi-competent adult. Some would consider this cheating. Harry would consider having a potions teacher not have a personal vendetta against you as cheating. It evened out. Yes, were Snape's first words to him. Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. I'm sorry, sir, is that your way of asking for an autograph? Harry asked innocently. He took the vein bulging in Snape's forehead to be a no and continued, it's just that I only found out that my parents weren't drunken bums who died in a car crash a little over a month ago, so I'm very new to this fame thing. I appreciate how considerate you're being. Oh, now look, another vein. While Harry fully acknowledged that Snape was one of the metaphorical good guys, he also realized that the only possible chance of him getting Snape to like him died when the Sorting Hat proclaimed him a Gryffindor. Actually, he reflected, he very well could make an effort, nah. What was the fun if he didn't have anyone to bother? And at least with Snape, everyone took his side. Potter. Snape's voice jolted him out of his musings. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Draught of living death, Harry replied matter-of-factly. Which is? Snape pressed. Professor, I'm not entirely sure why you're asking me questions to which you don't know the answer, but I'm pleased to inform you that I, a first year, know that it is a very powerful sleeping potion that makes it appear that you're dead. Of course I knew that, Potter. Snape snapped. I'm sure you did, Harry said, sounding slightly dubious. Well, I suppose everyone gets lucky once, something that you'd know plenty about, Potter. Snape muttered distractedly. Harry stared. Sir? Did you just compare me getting a potion's answer to correct to Voldemort attempting to brutally murder me after brutally murdering my mum and dad? Snape started, realizing he'd spoken aloud. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezer? In the potions cupboard. Harry suggested. Snape's eyes flashed. Potter. What? You can't actually expect me to go out, find a goat, and extract a bezer from its stomach, can you? At this, Harry looked a bit scared. He had no doubt that Snape could very well expect that of Harry. Especially if he continued to provoke him like this. What's the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Snape fired off another question. It's not very nice to try and trick me, sir, Harry said. And I know full well that they're the same plant. Although why they go by 2 different names, well, 3 if you count aconite, is beyond me. I suppose you qualify as competent, Potter, Snape said grudgingly, completely ignoring the fact that first years should not be expected to memorize their textbooks on the first day. Although that first question, when Harry was trying to get Ginny to forgive him for abandoning her after Dumbledore's funeral, he decided to send her a message in flowers and so got a book on Victorian flower language. If he recalled correctly, asphodel was a type of lily meaning my regrets follow you to the grave, and wormwood means absence and also typically symbolized bitter sorrow. If you combined that, it meant I bitterly regret Lily's death. Now, there's no way a normal first year would be able to get that, and Harry didn't even know if Snape meant to convey that, but it just seemed like too big of a coincidence. Out of all the potions Snape could have asked about, he chose that. Thank you, Harry said quietly. Snape just nodded curtly. Well, why aren't you all copying that down? Harry partnered with Ron and noticed that Neville was looking a bit pale. Hey, Neville. Why don't you work with Hermione? After all, she's read the textbook a few times and so she probably won't mess up, Harry suggested. Hermione smiled at this and the two moved over to the same table. And Harry was right, Hermione did know what she was doing and Neville managed to avoid exploding anything this time around. He still cast Protego on himself, but that was more to get into the habit of it. Now that he knew how to protect himself from the various potions incidents, why not use it, after all? Chapter 4. The morning of their first flying lesson had Harry a bit nervous. Not that he didn't know how to fly, of course, far from it. But the last time had been rather eventful. He wanted to get on the Quidditch team, but he wasn't about to just sit back and let Neville break his wrist. Granted, it didn't do any lasting physical damage, but it had deeply embarrassed him and Harry didn't feel that he would be justified to let it all happen again just so that he wouldn't have to wait a year to join the team. And then there was the issue of Draco Malfoy to consider. Last time, he had stolen Neville's Remembrall and the ensuing dominance battle between the two of them had earned him a place on the team. Harry had no doubt that Malfoy would pull the same stunt, the only difference was that he had to somehow repeat the catch without the accompanying hatred. It was possible that the event wouldn't take place at all, but Neville wouldn't fall off his broom. On the other hand, how was Harry supposed to prevent that? The best he could really do was a cushioning charm, which he vaguely wondered why Madame Hooch hadn't done the first time. Because, really, it's not like she could have realistically been panicked because Neville, no matter how incompetent he had seemed back then, couldn't have been the only one to have ever fallen off a broom. Perhaps she was a squib, he didn't think he'd ever seen her do magic. He supposed it didn't matter though, since he, unlike practically everyone else in the wizarding world, honestly didn't care if someone was part house elf. And no, the reason he used house elves as an example wasn't prejudice, just simple logic as to the circumstances that would lead to a house elf and a human having a baby. He was jolted from his musing by Draco's arrival. Neville had just received his Remembrall and Draco had, as before, snatched it. Harry had never found Remembralls very useful, despite what other people said. After all, what was the point of knowing you'd forgotten something if the bloody ball never told you what it was? And for that matter, who hasn't forgotten something at any given point in time? Maybe it was like Muggle mood rings. Of course, those might have even been more pointless because chances are you already knew what you were feeling and thus didn't need a gaudy piece of jewelry to tell you. Ron jumped to his feet, clearly eager to start a fight. Oh, sit down, Ron. It's too early to fight, Harry complained. I mean, we haven't even finished breakfast. But Malfoy. Ron protested. Oh, he'll still be around later if you absolutely must engage in petty house pride bickering, Harry assured him. Ron looked a little cross at the dismissive mention of his apparent family feud with the Malfoys, but did as Harry asked. Harry briefly wondered why in the world the wizarding world still operated on a blood feud system since most Muggle societies, and certainly all Western European ones, had outgrown generation-long grudges that nobody ever knew the meaning for and that never ended until a person from both families fell in love with each other or they killed each other centuries ago. Thank you, Harry said. So what are you doing over here anyway? He asked Draco. Was Neville's Remembrall too shiny for you to resist? Well, I initially came over here to taunt Weaselboy about his broom quality, Draco informed him. Harry snorted at the double entendre, which flew way over everyone's heads except Hermione's, who looked a little disapprovingly at Harry and muttered, boys. Draco just looked at Harry strangely and continued. But then I saw this. Everyone knows that only losers need Remembralls. They went out of fashion at least 20 years ago. Clearly Draco didn't understand the appeal of retroness. But for that matter, Augusta Longbottom probably didn't know either, she was just old and thought toads were still in. Then why did you decide that you absolutely must have it immediately and couldn't have even asked Neville first? Harry asked reasonably. Draco trailed off, not sure how to answer that. Draco, are you a kleptomaniac? Harry asked him seriously. What the bloody hell is that? Malfoy asked, sensing he'd been insulted. A person who is compelled to steal for no adequately explained reason, Harry replied, remembering something Hermione had told him a few years back. Or it was something like that. It definitely meant stealing a lot. In fact, Harry could probably make a good case for Voldemort being a kleptomaniac. And Dumbledore, too, the items he kept from Harry because he wasn't mature enough for things his father had since he was a child until after Voldemort was defeated. No. Draco insisted. Then I'm sure you won't have any trouble returning that, Harry smiled brightly at him. Malfoy huffed in annoyance. Fine, he said, handing the ball back and then returned to his table. Harry looked up and saw Professor McGonagall, watching from the staff table, gazing at the scene with approval. Oh dear Lord, if Harry wasn't careful, they might actually make him a bloody prefect. And while it's true that Harry was upset at the time, he quickly realized that Ron being the prefect instead was rather nice as he didn't have to be up at all hours patrolling the corridors in case any students fancied a midnight stroll. Seriously, you'd think that Hogwarts have a better security system, but no. That's not traditional. Tradition in the wizarding world, as Harry understood it, was just what they said when their hopelessly outdated ways were questioned and served as an excuse to continue doing what they've been doing since time immemorial simply because they've been doing it since time immemorial. Why do you put up with him? Hermione asked Harry once he returned his attention to the table. What do you mean? Harry asked. He hasn't actually done anything yet. And we've been here for over a week and a half, he added silently. Well, no, Hermione conceded. But he doesn't seem like a very pleasant person. Harry shrugged. Unpleasant people need friends, too, he pointed out. So you're taking pity on him? No, Harry shook his head. I might be nice to someone because I pity them, but I would never befriend someone because of that. In fact, it wasn't even guaranteed that he'd make an effort to be civil, if Snape was any indication. Harry pitied the man immensely, and he couldn't imagine if Ginny chose to marry, say, Draco Malfoy, in true Romeo and Juliet fashion, and then he told Dumbledore something he'd overheard as a way to destroy Voldemort and that ended up getting Ginny killed. And then if she had a child who, due to the recessive nature of red hair and the dominant nature of dark eyes, looked just like Malfoy with Ginny's eyes, and having to teach him for 6 years even though they both hated each other, and he'd had to live with the guilt of Ginny's death for 10 whole years prior to meeting the child. And Harry had heard that Draco was planning on naming his firstborn son Scorpius, of all things. Honestly, did that man have any sense? Still, it's not like Snape would actually appreciate any effort on his part and probably think he was patronizing him, so really, why not just enjoy the animosity while it lasted? Although note to self, should Snape, against all odds, be ordered by Dumbledore to assist in his suicide, tell Order that a Death Eater did it and then refuse to talk about it, claiming trauma. So then why? Hermione pressed. I just think that life would be a lot simpler if I kept my list of enemies down to a bare minimum. Malfoy could probably do quite a bit to taint my Hogwarts experience if he so chose, and I know that he endorses Death Eater views, but he's 11, he doesn't really understand it. Besides, I've always wanted a friendly rivalry with someone and he seems like he could be a fun rival, Harry explained. So you don't really like him? Not really, but then, we've been here for a week and a half, I don't really know him. And it was true. Even after knowing him for 12 years, he still didn't. Fair enough. Now, what do you mean he supports Death Eaters? As in Voldemort? Hermione asked. Harry was a little surprised that Hermione used Riddle's chosen pseudonym, not the ministry-approved euphemisms, but then again, she'd only been really introduced to the wizarding world 2 weeks ago, so perhaps she hadn't gotten into the habit yet. Or ever, if Harry could help it. Draco's father is a Death Eater, Harry told her quietly. And his mother supports his pure-blood ideologies in principle, but doesn't want Draco caught up in all of that. Then why didn't they arrest Mr. Malfoy, if he was a Death Eater? Harry asked. Did I mention that St. Mungo's just happened to finally receive enough funding to build a children's wing right before Lucius was to have been tried? Harry asked innocently. Bribery? Hermione asked scandalously. Get used to it, Harry advised her. And what exactly is pure-blood ideology? I mean, I've read up on the war, of course, and it's mentioned quite a bit in there, but it doesn't really go into much detail on what it is, they just assume that you already know, she told him. Harry sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. How best to explain? You'll find that blood purity, like many things in the wizarding world, makes no sense whatsoever. Wizards, of course, don't seem to notice this and continue to act like it's the gospel truth. It's basically the school of thought that only those who are pure-blooded have a right to be wizards and everyone else is inherently inferior. They won't actually give any reason as to why they think that, save occasionally someone mentioning that Muggleborns live the first 11 years of their life in a completely different culture. Note that that is exactly like saying that someone who was raised in a different country is inherently inferior because they don't understand British ways. What is a pure-blood exactly? I mean, I get the whole descended from wizards thing, but how far back does it have to go? Hermione asked. Harry grinned. Technically, it means that you have 4 wizarding grandparents. My grandparents on my mother's side were Muggles, so I'm known as a half-blood. Any children I have, though, will theoretically be pure-bloods, despite their Muggle-born grandmother. Of course, I'm sure that blood purists won't actually admit that she could possibly be a pure-blood. For most people, I think it's if you know how closely related to a Muggle you are, you're too closely related to be a pure-blood. How do they manage to keep from marrying Muggles or half-bloods? Hermione asked. I mean, there can't be very many proper pure-blood families, can there? Nope, Harry smirked. In fact, they seem to die off all the time. Then how? Hermione trailed off, thinking. Guess. Oh, don't tell me they. Hermione trailed off again, looking slightly green. You know what, I think I have my own philosophy regarding marriage. If you know how closely related you are to someone, you're too closely related to date. Works for me, Harry agreed, making a mental note to never look up his or Ginny's family tree under any circumstance. Harry looked over in time to see Neville's broom take off. He was rising pretty quickly and Harry tensed, waiting for him to fall. When he did, Harry quickly and silently cast a cushioning charm. There was a loud thump as Neville hit the ground, but overall he seemed to be okay. Of course, try telling that to Madame Hooch, who insisted on taking him to the hospital wing anyway. None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave these brooms where they are or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say Quidditch. Come along, dear, she said and guided him back into the building. Oh please, Harry said, wondering how he could have possibly believed that last time. The worst we'll get is a detention. Malfoy burst into laughter when he was sure that Madame Hooch was out of earshot. Did you see his face, the great lump? Shut up, Malfoy, Parvati snapped. Ooh, sticking up for Longbottom, asked Pansy. Never thought you'd like fat little crybabies, Parvati. To be fair, it's not like he was crying, Harry pointed out. I don't think he was even hurt. How could he not be hurt? He fell 30 feet, Lavender reminded him. True, Harry nodded. But it's not like he hasn't fallen from great heights before without getting injured. Look! Malfoy exclaimed, spotting Neville's remembrall and rushing forward to pick it up. It's that stupid thing Longbottom's gran sent him. I swear, Harry said, somewhat annoyed. What is it with you and that thing? I'm sure if you really want one that badly, your father can buy you one. Malfoy flushed. I do not want one. Could have fooled me. Harry muttered. Because it seems like you keep stealing Neville's because you're jealous that you don't have an awesome magical mood ring. Draco looked confused at the end of Harry's statement, but quickly rallied. Nonsense, I just think that it's an affront to proper wizards when someone from such an old family has to rely on those. Pardon me, Hermione spoke up. But what do you mean by old family? Aren't all families equally old? Well, yes, Draco admitted reluctantly. But I meant old pureblood wizard family. Just checking. So you hope to cure Neville of his reliance on this, which, given he got it this morning, isn't exactly an issue, by doing what, exactly? Harry asked. Destroying it, Draco replied promptly. The sad thing is, you probably are trying to help him in a rather twisted way, Harry remarked. I probably can't force you not to destroy it, but we could bet on who gets it. What kind of bet? Malfoy asked, intrigued. Seeker competition, Harry explained. We could give the Remembrall to someone and then have them throw it and whichever one of us catches it wins and gets to do what they like with it. And if no one catches it? Malfoy asked. Harry shrugged. Then it'll shatter, won't it? You're on, Draco agreed. Who'll be the judge, though? We'd need to find someone impartial. I'm thinking, Theodore Nott, Harry said. You wouldn't trust anyone in Gryffindor and I know that Nott doesn't take orders from you, so I guess that's about as close to impartial as we're going to get. I agree, Nott's a good choice. What do you say? Draco turned to Theodore Nott. Looking a little peeved at being dragged into this, Nott nonetheless nodded curtly and grabbed the Remembrall. Once the three of them were up in the air, Nott said, ready, set, go and dropped the Remembrall. Harry and Draco, both on rather pathetic brooms, raced neck and neck to be the first to catch it. Draco didn't really want to catch the Remembrall, per se, as much as prevent Harry from catching it and his pride wouldn't let him do anything less than his best. Finally, half a foot from the ground, Harry's hand closed over it just seconds before Draco's and they both tumbled onto the grass. Nice flying, Harry complimented, knowing that losing in front of all of their classmates was likely to put Malfoy in a bad mood and make him say or do something stupid. Thanks, Malfoy said grudgingly. You too. Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy. Professor McGonagall screeched. Malfoy looked a little green as the Transfiguration Professor continued to yell at them. Don't worry, worst come to worst, we'll just get a detention and lose a few house points, Harry assured him. Hell, we might even get some recognition for our amazing flying. Draco perked up a bit at this. How dare you might have broken your neck dash. Well, unless it killed me instantly, I'm sure that Madame Pomfrey could fix it right up, Harry said cheerfully. Although it's nice to know that you care. Potter, Malfoy, follow me, now, McGonagall instructed. First, McGonagall led them to the dungeons, where Snape was teaching sixth-year potions. Against all odds, the Slytherin captain, Marcus Flint, who ended up having to repeat his 7th year, unless Harry was very much mistaken, seemed to have qualified for Newt potions. Severus, a word. Snape and McGonagall went into his office to have a private discussion. My father is going to kill me, Draco announced. If you were going to get in trouble, she wouldn't need to get Snape involved, Harry pointed out. Then what could she possibly be talking to him about? Draco asked. I don't know, how's the Slytherin Seeker? Well, I heard the old one graduated last year so they haven't found a new one yet and, you don't think? Draco trailed off, sounding incredibly hopeful. Harry shrugged. You never know. In fact, I'm nearly positive McGonagall's going to ask me. I heard that the Gryffindor team hasn't had a decent Seeker since Ron's brother Charlie graduated. But first years aren't allowed to have their own brooms. And you brought yours anyway, Harry pointed out. Still, that rule probably precludes us from playing, Draco said, sounding disappointed. In most circumstances, yes, but I'm Harry freaking Potter, of course they're going to make an exception. What about me? Draco asked. They'll have to let you play, too, so it looks like I'm not getting special treatment, Harry said. Shortly after, Snape and McGonagall left the office and Flint was called out into the hall. Flint, Malfoy will be playing a Seeker, Snape informed him without ceremony. Harry gave Draco a look that said see. Draco just nodded, thrilled. And he didn't even have to bribe his way on this time. With that, he and McGonagall left to go find Wood. Chapter 5.